Hi there, and welcome to Empowering Democracy. This is another Dump the Corruption show. Tonight, we will be comparing the fundraising records and the positions of Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. And I am being joined by the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, my good friend, Dee Peers.
Happy to
Hello,
be here.
and I'm happy to have you here.
It's going to be an interesting show tonight.
It will be. And we just had a very interesting show also because we had to do a show that commented on and evaluated the appearance of the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, his appearance and speech before the Congress of the United States, where he met with lots of standing ovations.
It's too much.
And where he lied to the faces of the Congress, okay, and all the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the Congress people were complicit in that lie. They knew it was a lie, but they supported it anyway. And the reason why they did is the justification of dump the corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Congress people of both parties are deathly afraid of the power of the huge donors that
Mm-hmm.
support the right-wing regime in Israel right now. If you are thought to be opposed to that regime, if you say anything against it, the mainstream quickly hits back against you because they live in mortal fear of those donors. Some of those donors can, if they wish to, produce hundreds of billions of dollars in external spending in order to defeat anyone they want to defeat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
The
the
super
secret.
PACs can be devastating. So can the regular PACs, but the super PACs, their performance in the recent primaries in 2022 was simply devastating. It was enough to strike fear into the hearts of every congressperson. We have to realize that the reason why our Dump the Corruption shows exist is to convince the people of the United States that the only way to get free of these donors is to oppose everyone who takes the big money when they run for office. We have shown in this particular series that every member of Congress takes the big money, and therefore that in 2024, every member of Congress who was running, 1/3 of the Senate, and every member of the House, and all the challengers who were taking the big money need to be defeated. We, the people, must decide to vote against them. It is not important. It's not as important to vote for somebody as it is to vote against them. Because if we vote against them, we ordinary Americans vote for other ordinary Americans who don't have places in the two major parties. Then the mainstream of America will come to Congress, people not bought by the donors. And the result will be that popular legislation, for example, student debt elimination, the Green New Deal, and the Medicare for All bills, and the child tax credits, infrastructure bills we badly need, will be voted on favorably by a new Congress not bought by the donors. That's what we have to reckon. We all have visions in our head if we oppose the two major parties that we might support some third parties, and that the third party people will be worthwhile voting for, that there'll be positive reasons, we'll be happy to vote for Green Party candidates or for Libertarian Party candidates or for no labels candidates or whoever the third party candidates are, as long as they are not taking the big money. We have the feeling that it's important who we vote for. Who we vote for. What we are telling you, it's more important who you vote against, not who you vote for. We need a sampling of unbought ordinary Americans to come to Congress, because knowing that they can't take any big money, they will also know that they must look to people like themselves for support, and to get that support, they will have to pass bills that the people of America support. They will have to do things in foreign policy that the people of America have to happen to support. The people of America want peace, so peace will be the product of such a Congress. The American people want a Green New Deal. They want student debt, to be eliminated. The majority want that. The majority of us want Medicare for all in the worst way. We can't get it if these donor poor people remain in Congress. They are blocking it. They are the reason why we don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
We must remove them all. It's more important who you vote against than who you vote for. That's what I'm telling you. I know it defies normal logic or common sense logic, but the situation we find ourselves in now in the United States defies common sense logic, because we've seen the failure of democracy. We cannot use the normal common sense to approach what we have to do now. So I tell you, it's more important who you vote against than who you vote for. I tell you that I am your friend if you vote against the people taking the big money, no matter who you vote for. I will still be pleased that you voted against the people who were taking the big money. So that's a slogan I hadn't really thought of before, Dee. It's more
Very good slogan.
it's more important who you vote against than who you vote for.
Mm-hmm.
That's a slogan,
Yeah, it's true.
and it's true.
Yeah, Jeffrey just said 92% of student debt is owned by the government.
Right. And it's not forgiving student debt for the sake of those other 8%. It's ridiculous. I shouldn't say that. That's not quite true. That's part of it. But the other part of it is the government is afraid of people who are worried about the moral hazard involved in forgiving student debt. They didn't care about the moral hazard in forgiving debt for business people who were harmed by COVID. They were forgiving their debt all over the place. They were forgiving debt of rich Republicans whose businesses were suffering. So they lost money on payroll. They were forgiving that debt all over the place. They didn't worry about moral hazard there. They only worry about moral hazard when it comes to forgiving the debts of poor people, okay, and middle class people. That's nonsense. There's no such thing as moral hazard here. Debts that people can't afford to pay will not be paid. That's it. Better forgive those debts and get on with the economic system.
Mm-hmm.
Even the people of ancient times knew that every 7 years there should be a jubilee for debt. We have people who have had student debt for 40 years and 50 years for their whole lives. And that debt has ruined many lives. And we've let it happen because we have the stupid, puritanical, moral debt ideas.
And it only amounts to the people, like you said, the people that don't have a lot of money. The wealthiest get forgiven all the time for stuff, and they get the handouts all the time.
They get the handouts all the time, and they have the bankruptcy protections all the time. Who needs the student debt? The people who don't have the money to go to college in the first place. Okay, the poorer people. Why is student debt beyond the bankruptcy code? Why can't the people who can't afford to pay the debt simply declare bankruptcy and go on with a clean slate? Nothing should be beyond the bankruptcy courts.
Right.
Not student debt and not a tax debt either. Anyway, that's taken off track here for tonight. But we need to dump the corruption. It is corrupting the way our whole political system works. And we can only dump the corruption if people will act to defeat the people who are taking the big money. So let's move to look at two people who we previously shown are
The
taking all
characters.
kinds of big money. Let's look again at who they're taking the big money from. Gee, I was sure I set this up before, but for some reason it's not here. So let me see what I did set up before. I might have, I might have set it up in my Google Drive. Okay. Hey, let me get their fundraising pages up. Ooh, bear with me for a second, please. Okay, let me do it this other way. Okay. Okay, our two friends here are Mitch McConnell, of course, and Chuck Schumer. Let's begin with Chuck Schumer. Let me share the page. There is Chuck Schumer. Now the majority leader of the Senate, after waiting a few years. We've seen these figures before. Let's look at his top contributors between 2017 and 2022. Okay, Democracy Engine was a top contributor. That was actually his top contributor. $328,480. From an energy association known as Next Era Energy, $302,600. The Blackstone Group, $277,000. The Blackstone Group, of course, is an investment group that controls huge amounts of funds across the world and real estate across the world. Other investments, Paul Weiss et al., a law firm, 224,000. Then, okay, there's Alphabet, the parent company of Google, $185,950. Look at top industries now. Securities and investment, $4.6 million. Lawyers and law firms, $3.1 million. Retired people, $2.6 million. Real estate industry, $2.3 million. Electronics, electronics manufacturing equipment, $923,400. Let's shift over to Senator McConnell. Can you see Senator McConnell now?
I just see Schumer.
Okay. Can you see McConnell now?
No, I just see. Oh, yeah, I see McConnell now. Yes.
Okay, great. So let's look at how McConnell is different from Schumer. Well, McConnell's top contributor was the Hunt Company, 17,400. His top industry was the retired industry. If you recall, one of Schumer's top industries was also the retired industry. Mitch McConnell raised more money than Chuck Schumer, as we see from these totals. But Chuck Schumer raised a considerable amount of money himself. So the top contributors were different between the two. But let's look at top industries. Okay, the retired industry for McConnell was $24.5 million. I'm going to quickly go back to Schumer. Okay, the retired industry was important for him too, but nowhere near as important. $2.6 million from that industry. That's still very important for him, but nowhere near the scale of the retired industry for Mitch. That's a surprising result. We don't know the reason why, especially because, generally speaking, it's Mitch who's much more threatening to the Social Security that retired people rely on. So why should he have raised almost 24.5 million from that industry? Okay, I can't really tell. The securities and investment industry was the second top industry for Mitch. That was $2.1 million.
And maybe his retirees are involved with, the securities and investment industry, their retirement.
Well, the securities and investment industry for Schumer, I'm looking at Schumer again, was his top industry. It was $4.6 million, as I indicated before. For Mitch, it's $2.1 million.
And then again, too, the retired people, when it comes to Kentucky, they were, with Roe v. Wade, pro-life and certain conservative issues, they put that before their retirement.
For Schumer, the lawyers and law firms were $3.1 million. Okay. As I said before, for McConnell, the lawyers and law firms were $1.2 million, still among the most important industries for him. The real estate industry was $2 million for Mitch. It was $2.3 million for Chuck. Still among the most important industries for him. But we have to mention again, for Mitch, okay, the retired industry was $24.5 million.
Right, and it was small donations. individual donations.
It was small individual donations for Chuck and small individual donations for Mitch. There was no PAC money for Mitch there. For Schumer, the PAC money for the retired industry, there was no PAC money. It was all also small individual donations.
I
Those
would think
results are very surprising, but perhaps the important point is the retired industry was most important for both of them. The lawyers and law firms were very important for both of them. The securities and investment industry, that was very important for both of them, but much more important for Chuck than for McConnell. Let's see. Uh, for Schumer, the real estate industry was 2.3 million. For McConnell, the real estate industry was 2.0 million. Both were among the most important industries. The scale of importance was about the same for both. Health professionals were very important for Mitch at 1.6 million. Let's see if health professionals were among the most important for Chuck. No, they were not among the top five for Chuck, but they were for Mitch. Still, when we look at the whole picture of the top five for both, there was a considerable amount of overlap in the top five industries for both. So you could say that their donor bases have much um, um, in common. But let's go back to Chuck and let's look at the industries tab.
Mm-hmm.
I'll look at the industries tab for Chuck, then I'll look at the industries tab for Mitch. Are you seeing the industries for Chuck right now, Dee?
No, and I see Hunt, so that's McConnell.
You're still looking at Mitch right now.
Yeah,
Okay. So let me share that. Now I think you're looking at it, right?
yeah. Here's Chuck. Yeah,
Chuck's a top recipient. So it doesn't say how much here, but it does say top industries for Chuck are air transport, airlines, alternate energy production and services, beer, wine, and liquor, clothing and accessories, defense, aerospace, defense electronics, electric utilities, finance/credit, general contractors, health services, hedge funds, lobbyists, lodging and tourism, also marijuana, uh, mortgage bankers and brokers, private equity and investment firms, pro Israel, securities and investments, telecom services, textiles, accountants, cable and satellite TV production, commercial banks, electronics manufacturing equipment, the gay and lesbian rights. There's real estate. There's lawyers, law firms. There's sugarcane, sugar beets, venture capital. Uh, so those last ones I read were second rank importance, and third ranker importance were gun control, insurance, but internet and also TV, movies, and music. Maybe I'll learn more. I think I will if I look at the top 20 industries. Let me look
Hmm.
at the top 20 industries, then I could just scroll down them. And then I'll go to Mitch and look at the top 20 industries. So we looked at the top five already. There were securities and investments, lawyers and law firms, retired. There was real estate and electronics, manufacturing and equipment. There was TV, movies, and music, 856,131. That was number six. Health professionals, there's health professionals there. If you recall, they were 1.6 million for Mitch. They're 815,000 for Chuck. Also very important. Lobbyists, 771,260. Hospitals, nursing homes, 707,749. Health services, HMOs, 704,658. Insurance companies, just about 700,000 for Mitch. There was miscellaneous finance, 623,000. Pro-Israel, 546,000. Also Democratic Liberal, 535,000. Business services, 508,000. Air transport, 485,000. Pharmaceuticals, health products, 480,000. Education, 468,000. Finance and credit companies, 408,000. Accountants, 374,000. I'm going to look at sector totals also. Agribusiness, this is all for Mitch, just about 400,000. Communications electronics, 2.8 million. Construction, 724 million. Defense, 346,000. Energy and natural resources, 758,000. The fire sector, 9.4 million for Chuck. Health industries, 2.8 million for Chuck. Lawyers and lobbyists, 3.8 million for Chuck. Uh, Ideological single issue, 2.0 million for Chuck. Also labor, 338,000 for Chuck. So those were the top industries and the top sectors. Now I'm going to switch back to Mitch. Share Mitch's tab instead. You should be seeing Mitch's tab
Yes,
right now.
yes.
Okay. I'm getting better at flipping back and forth between these two. Uh, I'll scroll down here till I get to the top industries and we'll go, oh, what happened? So for Mitch, oh no, I know what happened. I didn't shift the tab. So I got to shift the tab for Mitch. Go to the industries tabs. There we go. Can you see the industries tab?
Um, yes. It says industries, yes.
Okay, good.
Top industries.
Okay. The top 20 industries. Okay, there's the retired industry, which again was so important for Mitch. Much less important for Chuck, but still there for Chuck. It was 2.6 million. But I'd like to find a way to account for that discrepancy. It's
Mhm.
quite strange. But anyway, I'm going forward with Mitch now. Okay, securities investment 2.1 million, real estate 2 million, health professionals 1.6 million. We saw that was twice as much as Chuck got from those industries. Lawyers and law firms 1.2 million. Uh, for Mitch, I think this is Mitch, yeah. Okay, Republican conservative 1.2 million. Insurance companies 1.1 million, retail sales 1.0 million, pharmaceuticals 833,000. You can see the pharmaceuticals were much more important for Mitch than they were for Chuck. The lobbyists, though, seem to be much more important for Chuck than they were for Mitch, 692,000. But still, you see the same categories that appear as important categories for industry contributions.
Mm-hmm.
Health services, okay, and HMOs. Uh, for Mitch, civil servants and public officials were important, which seems counterintuitive to me. We'll go back to Chuck in a minute and check for that, see if that same category is there. Uh, Business services, 485,000. Commercial banks, 481,000 for Mitch. Let's go back to top industries for Chuck. For lobbyists, Chuck got 771,000. Let's briefly check how important lobbyists were. For Mitch, Mitch
It's the oil and gas.
was 692,000. So Chuck had lobbyists. His lobbyists were more important
Mm-hmm.
for him, but not by that much. There was hospitals and nursing homes and HMOs, as I recall. Those were important for Mitch as well. I have to shift tabs here. We're back to Chuck's tab now.
Okay.
So insurance was 700,000. They were, of course, important for Mitch also. Pro-Israel groups were not important for Mitch, I believe. They're more important for Chuck, aren't they?
Well, I don't remember the amount that Mitch got. Mitch, yeah, it's important to him too, I believe.
Okay, I'm not sure I see pro-Israel groups in the top 20.
Take a look again.
Yeah, I'm looking again.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah, I didn't switch the tabs, but no, strangely, pro-Israel groups are not in the top 20 for Mitch,
Okay.
but they are in the
That's
top 20 for Chuck, which is interesting. $500,000, 546,000. The Democratic and Liberal groups, 535,000 for Chuck. Let's see what the figure was in terms of Republican groups for Mitch. Yeah, they kicked in 1.2 million for Mitch. So he did much better within his own ideological groupings than Chuck did. But the ideological contributions were important for both. Uh, Pharmaceuticals and health products were very important for Chuck. Let's see if they're even listed for Mitch. Yeah, 832,000 for Mitch, 479,000 for Chuck. So the pharmaceutical companies were more important for Mitch than they were for Chuck, but they were important for both of them.
And that's why when we look at wanting a Medicare for all, they've got a lot of lobby money coming in not to have
Oh
the
yeah,
Medicare for
yeah,
all.
a lot of money. Like for Chuck, there are health services HMOs 704,000. There's also hospitals and nursing homes 707,000. Health professionals 815,000. So Mitch, the health categories, there are four health categories very important to Chuck. For Mitch, there's health professionals and pharmaceuticals. two categories very important for him. Hospitals and nursing homes important for him too. 625,152 from the hospitals and nursing homes, and health services from the HMOs, 516,000. So there are four health categories important for Mitch as well. I noticed for Mitch, civil servants and public officials were important at 485,000. You would expect them to be important for Chuck too, but I don't see them as among the top categories for Chuck, which is kind of interesting. Why would they be more important for Mitch? Generally, Democrats are more favorable to civil servants than Republicans are. So that's a mystery here. Also, I'm going to now compare the sector totals. Again, we'll refresh our memories for Chuck first, then I'll quickly shift over to Mitch. Agribusiness, 400,000 for Chuck. Communications electronics, 2.8 million. Construction, 724,000 for Chuck. The fire sector, Chuck's the senator from Wall Street, got
Mm-hmm.
9.4 million from the fire sector. The health sector, 2.8 million. I don't think that's going to be too different from Mitch. Lawyers and lobbyists, 3.8 million. Labor, 338,000. I don't think Mitch is going to get anything there. In the ideological area, ideological single issue groups, just about 2.1 million for Chuck. I'm going to shift over to Mitch and now share this tab instead. So here's Mitch that you should be seeing now. I'm going to go down to the sector totals and see if they clarify any more. Agribusiness, 1.2 million, as I recall. That's considerably higher than Chuck's total, but that category was important for both of them. Communications electronics, was more important for Chuck than for Mitch, but Mitch did 1.2 million in there too. Construction was about 750,000 for Chuck, but it's 1.5 million for Mitch, which I find interesting because usually it's the Democrats who are much more interested in infrastructure, which of course should be very valuable. I didn't notice how important the defense industry was for Chuck, but it was only 331,000 for Mitch, which is a surprise to me.
That is a surprise.
Energy and manufacturing, energy and natural resources, 1.3 million just about for Mitch. Here's the fire sector. So remember, that was about 9.4 million for Chuck, the senator from Wall Street, but it's 6.5 million for Mitch, which is very substantial. The health sector, recall, was 2.8 million for Chuck, 3.7 million for Mitch. A very, very important sector, probably among the top 4 or 5. As a sector, slightly more important for Mitch than for Chuck, but very important for both of them. Lawyers and lobbyists, 1.9 million for Mitch. I think that was more important for Chuck. I'm going to switch back to see lawyers and lobbyists, 3.8 million for Chuck, 1.9 million for Mitch. So that's very interesting. Okay, so there was considerable overlap between the two in terms of sectors that were important for both. And from the sectoral data, I think you get a better impression of which sectors are important for the two men. And you can see there is considerable overlap in the source of funds, particularly in the fire sector. Okay, in the health sector, in construction, okay, agribusiness, you have considerable overlap. In labor, you have almost no overlap. There was 338,000 for Mitch, 46,000 for only 46,000 for Mitch,
Mhm.
338,000 for Chuck. Let's catch energy, natural resources, 1.6 million for Mitch. I'll move back to Chuck here. See if I get the same category. 758,000 for Chuck. So it is much more important than for Mitch than it is for Chuck. Considerably more important. That may represent a difference from fossil fuel companies,
Mhm.
which are much more favorable to Republicans than to Democrats. Okay, let's look at the positioning of the two men now, at the positions. So I've got the Wikipedia page for Mitch up here.
Okay.
Uh, I also have to get the Wikipedia page for Chuck Schumer. I'll have it just a second. Okay, by the way, Chuck is slightly younger than Mitch. Where's the frickin' Wikipedia page? There it is. Charles Ellis Schumer. Let me get it near where Mitch is. Okay, so let me stop sharing this for a minute, and I'll share the screen again for Chuck Schumer. Why am I doing Chuck first? Because he's a majority leader right now.
Okay.
You know, elections have consequences.
Yes, they do.
Share. Uh, can't believe this guy is younger than I am. I can't believe he's 11 years younger than I am. I mean, he's a freaking old man already. So,
Sure is.
okay, so let's get to uh, skip whether he's a graduate. He is a graduate of Harvard College. Let's see where Mitch came from, but I'll hold that till later when we get to Mitch. Uh, Obviously, his early life and education was far different. For Mitch's, I will skip how they got there. Look at skip the politics. Senate Democratic leader. Mitch is a publicity hound, as we covered last time.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm going to skip the local issues also. Well, I guess these are categories, so I do have to go over the categories. Mitch visits all the counties in New York State, 62 counties every year. He focuses on local issues, evidently. If some business is thinking of changing its location from outside of New York to somewhere else, uh, Schumer is very concerned with that. He, he blasted Adidas because it was planning to shift its contract for the manufacture of NBA jerseys uh, from a New York State company, and they wanted to outsource it overseas. So Schumer blasted the company.
Mm-hmm.
When Canon was considering relocating from its corporate headquarters in Long Island because of dispute over road infrastructure funding, he stepped in to advocate that New York State redirect federal stimulus dollars to make the road improvements and keep the company and its jobs on Long Island. So probably in local things, probably Mitch is going to be very much like that also. Okay, I suspect trying to keep the jobs in the local area. Uh, on drugs, Schumer and John McCain introduced some legislation intended to make it more difficult for makers of brand name drugs to keep generic drugs off the market.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something Schumer did. Schumer seems to be in favor of generic drugs. Uh, and he manifested that during a press conference in October 2001. Said the federal government had the authority to order the immediate production of generic ciprofloxacin to expand the government stockpile. Okay, the drug uh, that's also known as Cipro, and Bayer wasn't very happy that Schumer did that. In July 2002, the Senate passed a bill sponsored by Schumer and McCain that could lower the costs of generic drugs more rapidly available to U.S. consumers and thereby lead to savings of dollars in drug costs. So Schumer is for saving consumers on drug costs, but he's not that much for it because he's not for Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
Be the biggest thing in saving dollars for consumers when it came to drug costs, especially if Medicare was given the authority to negotiate with the drug companies, which in the Medicare for all bills they are. Uh, okay, Schumer's interested in terrorism and the FBI sharing information to help the local authorities to contain terrorism. Uh, Schumer at various times has said that he's lost the confidence in FBI Director Comey. We haven't seen any criticism of the current director of the FBI from him yet. Uh, of course, the Republicans were very unhappy with the current FBI director just a few days ago when he came to testify.
Mm-hmm.
Schumer was very concerned with the Mueller investigation and has been very concerned with investigations of Donald Trump. Okay, of late, uh, on the Supreme Court, course, Schumer has been very angry at the Republican appointments to the Supreme Court. Of course, the quote stealing of the Supreme Court, okay, unquote, was something that was manufactured and shepherded very vigorously by Mitch McConnell over the years, and reconstructing the Supreme Court so that it's an extremely right-wing Supreme Court was something that was basically successfully done by Mitch McConnell. Schumer, as the minority leader at that time, wasn't able to do anything about it. Okay, so they were conflicting on that over control of the Supreme Court. Schumer was very active in trying to give trouble to the nominees, the Republican nominees of the Supreme Court. Uh, and he's been hostile in his statements towards the Supreme Court. But he hasn't been able to get anything through Congress to do anything about the Supreme Court. Why is that?
Exactly. Why?
One of the biggest reasons why is because he has never tried to get rid of the filibuster. Never. Of course, to be fair to him, there are some Democrats who would not vote with him on getting rid of the filibuster. But also, to be fair to him, an entirely different way. He hasn't made those senators go on record. He hasn't really pressured those senators who want to retain the filibuster by trying to get rid of the filibuster on votes for specific issues, like the Voting Rights Acts that he's supposedly supporting and trying to push through. There are certain things he never brings to the floor.
Right.
Like he never brings to the floor any of Bernie Sanders's, Bernie Sanders bills for Medicare for all. He never wants to embarrass the right-wing senators from the Democratic side by making them go on record for votes. For that matter, he evidently doesn't like to embarrass the Republicans who might be moved to get rid of the filibuster in certain areas where they supposedly favor some reform. Of course, I'm thinking about senators like Susan Collins, okay, Lisa Murkowski, also Mitt Romney, the 4 or 5 of the Republicans who occasionally entertain joining the Democrats on certain bills. He doesn't try to embarrass them, okay, or to pressure them. His political positions. Schumer is pro-choice when it comes to abortion.
Yeah.
Okay, but he has never tried to codify Roe v. Wade. He voiced concern in 2018 about Trump's choice of a replacement for Anthony Kennedy, who, of course, proved to be Kavanaugh. So he voiced concern because he believed that Kavanaugh was going to overturn the Roe v. Wade decision. Of course, Kavanaugh did vote in that way. But Chuck has never tried to push through a codification of Roe v. Wade into law. He's never gotten together, okay, with Nancy Pelosi and said, "Come on, let's do this. Let's pass this out of the House, and then I will put things to the vote, okay, in the Senate. I will try to get rid of the filibuster on this issue. I will do everything I can possibly do to get a majority for this." Chuck, okay, has never done that. He's acted like all the rest of the Democrats. We use that for fundraising, but we never do it. We never do anything concrete to try to get the codification passed. We never do anything concrete when it comes to expanding the Supreme Court. We never do anything concrete when it comes to passing Medicare for all. Uh, I'm skipping over, okay, a number of these issues. I guess I'm not showing this tab, so I will show this tab now. What happened? View tab, there it is. Okay. So you should be seeing that tab now.
Yeah, I see. Now, it was before. I saw it before.
Oh, okay. So, uh, here's his position on the, Clinton impeachment. That's not really an issue right now. Um, on consumer issues, he passed legislation that required uniform disclosure information on the back of credit card applications, uh, notifying prospective cardholders of annual fees, okay, and interest rates. The standardized information is now known as the Schumer box. I've never noticed the Schumer box. Maybe it's because of the small print. I was just thinking, the other day when I was going over some of the information the credit card companies are sending out. The print is so small that an old person, such as myself, even with corrective lenses, has a very difficult time actually reading the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I can use both my corrective lenses and a magnifying glass, and it's still very difficult to read the stuff. One thing Congress could do is pass a simple law that disclosures using small fonts are prohibited, that all fonts must be 12 point, okay, or greater. Uh, I think that would help a lot of people. It's a very small thing, but it would make the disclosures more worthwhile for people because they'd be able to read them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Schumer has been working to ban the chemical bisphenol A, BPA, often found in baby bottles and plastic children's containers and also in canned goods. It's, very frequently in canned goods. Uh, but he hasn't been able to pass any legislation on that. Okay, the Canadian government has banned the BPA in baby bottles and children's products. Schumer is also seeking a ban on the use of cadmium, a carcinogen known to impair brain development in children and toys and jewelry for children. When companies begin selling gloves, pills, inhalers, diuretic shampoos, and other products during the 2009 swine flu scare, he urged the Federal Trade Commission to open an investigation. In the end, the FTC put 10 companies on notice and identified a total of 140 scams. Well, that was a useful thing to do, I guess. But as we must recognize, it is small ball. He's championed college tuition tax credits, and he's also championed the elimination of student debt. Uh, I guess is it the first 40,000 of student debt or the first 50,000 of student debt? He and Elizabeth Warren have championed that. Okay, in the Senate. Schumer received an A grade on the 2008 Drum Major Institute's congressional scorecard on middle class issues. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I don't think it has anything to do with the middle class issue, okay, of regulating Wall Street. So he hasn't made a move to regulate Wall Street at all. And of course, as you know, he's known as the senator, okay, from Wall Street. He wants to end restrictions on shipping beer, wine, and spirits through the U.S. Postal Service, saying it would help keep local post offices open by bringing in an estimated $225 million in new revenues to the USPS and broaden the availability of beers and wines to consumers. So Chuck's for beer and wine.
Oh.
Okay, on the death penalty, he thought the death penalty would be appropriate in the case of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the perpetrator of the bombing in the marathon in Boston in 2013. He said, the federal law allows the death penalty. I wrote the law in 1994 when I was head of the crime subcommittee in the House. This is just the kind of case it should be applied to. So he's been for disaster relief. He was recognized for helping to achieve the award of $700,000 in compensation from FEMA for Gowanda, New York, which was a victim of devastating floods there in 2009. Pretty sure Gowanda was hit again a few weeks ago. Many more places in New York were hit again also by ruinous flooding. Haven't heard anything about what he's doing about that, however. Okay. On Donald Trump, of course, he tries to make things uncomfortable for Trump, okay, as possible. There are some anti-Semitism issues, okay, that arise in relation to his statements on Donald Trump. In March 2002, as the Senate worked on a compromise to save an election reform bill that stalled due to Republicans believing it was not combative enough against voter fraud, Schumer and Ron Wyden led a successful effort in protecting an amendment allowing first-time voters to be verified with only a signature. He's been a supporter of equal pay. In his early career, he was a supporter of regulating the financial industry back in 1987. He even wrote an op-ed in the New York Times opposing repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. In 1999, though, he supported Congress's repeal of Glass-Steagall, saying, quote, "There are many reasons for this bill, but first and foremost is to ensure that the U.S. financial firms remain competitive. Since 2010, the securities and investment industry has been the largest donor to Schumer's senatorial campaigns." Uh, According to a December 4, 2008 New York Times article on Schumer's role in the meltdown of Wall Street, he embraced the industry's free market deregulatory agenda more than any other Democrat in Congress, backing measures blamed for contributing to the financial crisis. A review of his record showed that he took steps to protect the industry from government oversight and tougher rules. Over the years, he helped save financial institutions billions of dollars in taxes or fees. The article claimed that Schumer succeeded in limiting efforts to reform and regulate credit rating agencies. The George W. Bush administration and the SEC had uh, um, um, proposed. So that's interesting. He was more right wing, more in back of Wall Street than the George W. Bush administration and the SEC.
Crazy.
More against trying to regulate the financial industry. The Chuck Schumer Rob Portman Senate Bill of 2015 proposed to tax the $2.2 trillion multinational corporations are holding outside the country in tax haven subsidiaries, on which 35% was already owed as a one-time tax, quote, at a rate significantly lower than the statutory corporate rate. I don't think that bill was ever passed because, of course, the multinational corporations didn't want any of their stuff in other nations to be touched by taxes. In his book in March 2010, No One Would Listen, Bernie Madoff whistleblower Harry Markopolos passed along an unsourced claim that Schumer called the SEC for information about the Madoff investigation. Schumer denied this. In response to the American Prospects Day 1 agenda, Schumer announced a new stance on eliminating student debt. He said, quote, "I have a proposal with Elizabeth Warren that the first 50,000 of debt be vanquished, and we believe Joe Biden can do that with the pen, as opposed to legislation." Of course, as we know, Joe Biden did not agree and never tried to use the authority under the Education Act to forgive the first 50,000 of debt. In foreign policy, in 2009, he was involved with legislation to address the Darfur genocide. Uh, of course, he was against any regulation or pressure on Israel. In April 2017, after the Shayrat missile strike, I think that was an Israeli missile strike, Schumer said a pinpointed and limited action to punish and hopefully deter President Assad from doing this again is appropriate, while warning against the United States becoming further involved in Syria. July 2017, he voted for the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which grouped together sanctions against Iran, Russia, and North Korea. So he's for using sanctions against foreign countries, which is illegal and a violation of human rights according to international law. because it's
Mhm.
classified as collective punishment. So Schumer is a violator, okay, of international law, as are most members of the Senate and the House.
Mhm. But they always get on everybody else's case for violating international law.
Yes. In October 2020, Schumer called on the Trump administration to immediately suspend the U.S. military aid to Azerbaijan, sent through the Pentagon's, quote, building partner assistance program, unquote. According to critics, the aid could be used in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. He co-signed a letter stating, "We have been very critical of U.S. security assistance to Azerbaijan, given the company's human rights record and aggression in the region. Earlier this year, at Senator Menendez's request, the Government Accountability Office agreed to conduct a review of security assistance to the country to ensure that it aligns with U.S. interests. This violence indicates that it does not." So that was the position he took, okay, in international relations, which is fairly notable. Okay, on Afghanistan, he's been pretty much for everything the executive branch wanted to do. Uh, he called for caution, but has been always supporting the administrations in the context, okay, of Afghanistan. In 2006, NPR reported that Schumer and Senator Lindsey Graham were highly critical of the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China and its alleged cause of Chinese currency intervention. They've asked both the Bush and Obama administrations to find China guilty of currency manipulation under a 1988 law. Schumer and Graham introduced legislation in three successive Congress to impose tariffs on Chinese goods for the purpose of raising the value of the Chinese yuan. Of course, none of that really got through. Uh, Schumer wrote to Trump advocating for a block on China. This was in 2017. That would prevent it from purchasing more American companies, to increase pressure on Beijing to help to rein in North Korea's nuclear missile program. That, of course, didn't work. In May 2018, after Trump signaled his willingness to ease sanctions on ZTE, I'm not sure what ZTE is, in a bid for a trade deal with Beijing, Schumer observed, "This seems to be an area where Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate are coming together, telling the president, you've got to be tough on China. You have to have your actions match your rhetoric." Before the Trump administration took concrete measures against China in March 2018, Schumer and other Democrat leaders pressed Trump to focus more on China. Schumer said China has stolen millions of jobs and trillions of dollars, but administrations from both parties haven't been strong enough to fight back. I don't think China has stolen anything. I think American manufacturers chose to relocate to China because they could make some bigger profits. Of
That's
course,
exactly what happened.
of course, the Congress never fought back uh, with legislation that would actually prevent the businesses from relocating to China. There was some legislation the French passed on this score, though. Uh, they simply said to French companies, if you want to relocate to China, go ahead, but you won't be allowed to import any goods into France any longer. The French companies quickly gave up the idea of relocating to China. The French were very effective in that way. The Iran nuclear deal. He announced his opposition to the nuclear deal with Iran, Why? Well, in addition to being the senator from Wall Street, he's also the senator from Israel. He planned to tell the White House, then his Senate colleagues and the public, but the White House leaked the news during the Republican debate in what CBS News described as an apparent attempt to limit coverage. Armed control expert Jeffrey Lewis derided Schumer's decision, noting that Schumer was making factually incorrect claims about the amount of time which the treaty would allow inspection of Iranian nuclear facilities in what The Guardian described as a shot across Schumer's bow. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said fellow Democrats might remember Schumer's decision when deciding whom to elect as their next leader of the majority. Of course, they did not remember that when it came time for voting for who was going to be the majority leader. Schumer was a supporter of the Iraq war resolution, but was very critical of President George W. Bush's strategy in the Iraq war. He suggested a commission of ex-generals be appointed, to review it. These are early things that I don't think really indicates his positions now. But Schumer was the first senator to call for U.S. support for Kurdish independence after the 2017 Kurdistan region independence by referendum, releasing a solution calling for the U.S. government to change its policy to support a political process that addresses the aspirations of the Kurds for an independent state. He called upon Iraq to engage in a dialogue and peacefully determine the best way to accommodate the well-deserved and legitimate aspirations of the Iraqi Kurds. Of course, from the international relations point of view, the Israelis have always supported the Kurdish independence because from a foreign policy point of view, it's better for them. So I'm saying Schumer's support for Kurdish independence is related to Schumer's support for the Israeli state. It's something Israel wants. Schumer supported Israel in the 2014 Israel-Gaza conflict. In March 2018, he told AIPAC's delegates that Israeli settlements in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, including east of Jerusalem, have nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That, of course, is completely idiotic and is obviously related to his continuing to receive big donor support from the Israeli lobby. He's a co-sponsor of a Senate resolution expressing objection to UN Security Council Resolution 2334, which condemns Israeli settlement building in the occupied Palestinian territories as a violation of international law. He criticized Obama, saying past administrations, both Democrat and Republicans, have protected Israel from the vagaries of this biased institution, the UN. Unfortunately, by abstaining on UN Resolution 2334, this administration has not followed in that the path. In May 17th, he co-sponsored the Israeli Anti-Boycott Act, Senate Bill 720, which made it a federal crime punishable by a maximum sentence of 20 years imprisonment for Americans to encourage or participate in boycotts against Israel and Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. If protesting actions by the Israeli government, the bill would make it legal for U.S. states to refuse to do business with contractors. Okay, North Korea He has a conventional position on North Korea. Okay, on Russia, he's down with whatever any administration uh, wants to do with Russia or against Russia, actually. Uh, he's completely opposed to Putin, of course. Uh, After Russia granted asylum to Edward Snowden, he said Putin was behaving like a schoolyard bully, quote unquote. So he's very worried about cybersecurity. He's, of course, he authored with Dianne Feinstein the assault weapons ban in 1994. He's strongly for gun control, but of course, he's never tried to get rid of the filibuster so that gun control bills would have any chance of passing at all. So, there it is. With healthcare, he has, of course, been consistent. He's not supported any Medicare for All programs. He's always supported what the Democratic administrations wanted to do. He was a partisan of uh, the Affordable Care Act. Okay, in Homeland Security, he's been there to support what any administration wanted to do. Uh, he hasn't done anything to push forward any peace initiatives. I think I've gone over his positions enough to establish that, generally speaking, he's responsive to the donors that we took some pains to go over earlier. So let's go to Mitch McConnell now. Can you see Mitch McConnell?
Yes.
Just point to Mitch McConnell page. Let's go over his stuff. Uh, he did not go to Harvard. He graduated from the University of Louisville with a BA in political science in 1964 with honors. He was president of the Student Council of the College of Arts and Sciences and a member of the Phi Kappa Tau fraternity. He graduated from the University of Kentucky College of Law, where he was president of the Student Bar Association. Uh, let's go to his positions at this point. Of course, he's been against all of the impeachments, the moves for impeachment affecting either Bush or Trump. There's a section here on relations with presidential administrations. What Mitch, is noted for is his positioning to defeat any Democratic president who takes office by preventing them from passing the legislation that they want to pass, and also to prevent them from uh, uh, passing any nominees to the Supreme Court starting in 2015. Uh, According to political scientists Jacob Hacker and Paul Pearson, what Mitch did was he worked to deny even minimal Republican support for major presidential initiatives that were, as a rule, in keeping with the moderate model of decades past and often with moderate Republican stances of a few years past. The New York Times noted early during Obama's administration on the major issues, not just health care, but financial regulation and the economic stimulus package, among others. He has held Republican defections to somewhere between minimal and non-existent, allowing him to slow the Democratic agenda, if not to defeat the aspects of it. Of course, he continued to do that all through the Obama administration and tried with all his power to do it during the Biden administration, trying to unite with some of the conservative Democrats to prevent uh, um, certain things from getting passed, specifically progressive legislation. He learned from the debt ceiling crisis that it's important to encourage those kinds of crises as we go forward. He worked to delay and obstruct healthcare reform and banking reform. One of McConnell's most common tactics was to delay or obstruct legislation and judicial appointments through use of the filibuster. We all know how consistently and skillfully he used the filibuster to stop the Democrats from passing bills when they had a majority in the Senate from 2009 to 2015. And how he has stopped them since Biden's takeover in 2021 from
Yeah, so
passing.
he uses it to favor what Republicans want.
Not just to favor, but to prevent from what Democrats want to pass.
But we don't see that with Schumer at all.
We don't see the Democrats reciprocating in kind.
Correct.
Okay, we don't. For example, Harry Reid had eliminated the filibuster for all presidential nominations, except the Supreme Court. If he had eliminated it for the Supreme Court, this was in 2013. If he had eliminated it for the Supreme Court, then today Merrick Garland would be on the Supreme Court. If he had gone further and had eliminated it for legislation, then all kinds of legislation might have been possible for the Obama administration in 2013 through 2016. So the Democrats have kept on looking for comity and compromise where there is none because, of Mitch McConnell. Certainly, Mitch McConnell has been backing his Wall Street investors, his fire sector investors, doing things that favor them and that allow them to escape from the regulation that they and we deserve. Uh, okay, Mitch McConnell in foreign policy has been very supportive, okay, of Donald Trump. Of course, he and Donald Trump had a deal when it came to getting people onto the Supreme Court. And basically, Trump traded that for McConnell's support on the things that Trump wanted to do. So they collaborated very, very closely. Trump has opposed the impeachments of Trump. I meant to say McConnell has opposed both of the impeachments, okay, of Trump,
Mhm.
in spite of the fact that he initially condemned Trump for January 6th. He was still unwilling to impeach him. Okay. McConnell's relationship with the Biden administration has been portrayed in media as one of comity. Biden has described Senator McConnell as a, quote, a friend, colleague, and a man of his word, unquote. McConnell, for his part, has praised bipartisan legislation they worked on together and had been the only Republican to attend the funeral of Biden's son, Beau, in 2015. In October 2021, McConnell helped pass a bill that extended the debt ceiling. He convinced 11 Republicans to vote with the Democrats for it, without which the United States would have defaulted on its debts. Of course, we have to point out that the contributors, okay, of Mitch McConnell would have been very angry at him if he had not helped to pass a bill extending the debt ceiling,
Mhm.
because that is a bridge too far for Mitch McConnell and for most of the Republicans. To the Freedom Caucus, of course, it is not a bridge too far, but it is a bridge too far for the rest of the Republicans. That's where they get off the debt ceiling crisis boat. Uh, of course, we know Mitch McConnell's records on getting the three Republicans onto the Supreme Court: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, and creating the 6-3 majority we currently have, which has allowed the devastating decisions of this uh, Supreme Court. It was Mitch McConnell who was the architect of this particular Supreme Court. So we have him to blame for that. I'm not sure that this Supreme Court is really consistent with the interests of many of Mitch's donors. When I look at the sectors that had contributed to him, I don't believe that the fire sector has taken a lot of pleasure from decisions of this particular Supreme Court. I also don't believe a lot of his contributors are really happy about the end, okay, of Roe v. Wade.
No.
And so I think that's something he did for some of his interests, specifically for the evangelical Christians. And to give them what they wanted and what they supported for the Republican Party, which in turn has been very important for Mitch retaining the leadership of the Republican Party in the Senate. Interestingly, in the area of the COVID-19 pandemic response, Mitch initially opposed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, calling it a Democratic ideological wish list. He subsequently reversed his position when Trump endorsed the proposed package. The bill passed in the Senate by a vote of 90 to 8. That was, of course, the CARES Act. Oh, sorry, that wasn't the CARES Act. That was the Family First Corona Response Act. He directed Senate Republicans in negotiations for two other COVID-19 response packages, the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriation Act of 2020 and the CARES Act. The CARES Act was the largest economic stimulus package in U.S. history, amounting to 10% of total U.S. gross domestic product. It passed both houses of Congress with bipartisan support. Speaking on the Hugh Hewitt radio show on April 22nd, 2020, McConnell suggested states should be able to declare bankruptcy instead of receiving additional COVID-19 aid funds which he implied would be used to save insolvent state pension funds instead of COVID-19 relief as intended. His comments were met with sharp criticism from various state and local officials. States currently cannot declare bankruptcy, which obviously they should not be able to do because they are not the businesses. They are public institutions. After the passage of the CARES Act, he waited several months before advancing any additional COVID-19 relief bills in the Senate, saying in May, "I don't think we have yet felt the urgency of acting immediately, that Congress should hit pause to evaluate how the allocated funds were working before approving more." He negotiated with Democrats and White House officials for an additional aid package, but he was absent from those talks. So he wasn't actually negotiating, which is why there weren't any additional aid package, which, by the way, probably hurt Donald Trump. In September 10th, the pared-down COVID-19 relief bill crafted by McConnell failed to advance the Senate past a Democratic filibuster. Democrats panned the bill as completely inadequate given the scope of the crisis brought on by COVID-19 and as a partisan maneuver to help Republican senators up for re-election. He called the bill a choice between doing something and doing nothing, said he was holding the procedural vote to get lawmakers on the record about their willingness to compromise on COVID-19 bills. I guess there's not much more to be said on that. There's a political position here, section here. He's taken conservative stances for the past several decades. During his Senate tenure, he led opposition to stricter campaign finance laws, culminating in the Supreme Court ruling that partially overturned the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act in 2010. That was, I believe, the act that led to the creation of super PACs. That is, it was the citizens' united decision by the Supreme Court. He led opposition against Obamacare, first through efforts to delay or prevent the law's package and later to repeal or replace it via the American Health Care Reform Act. He opposed stronger regulations, gun control measures, and efforts to mitigate climate change. He has critiqued proposed legislation by House Democrats, such as the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, and was criticized by Nancy Pelosi for withholding votes on measures passed by the Democratic-controlled House during his time as the majority leader of the Senate, including for the People Act of 2019, the Equality Act, and the Paycheck Fairness Act. He supported stronger border security, free trade agreements, and reductions in taxes. He led the passing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts of 2017 and the economic growth uh, of the Regulatory Relief and Consumer Protection Act in 2018. His foreign policy views have included support of sanctions on Cuba, Iran, and Russia, opposition to the Iran nuclear deal, and support of Israel. He voted for the Iraq resolution, which authorized the military action against Iraq, and supported the Iraq war troop surge of 2007 in public. Early in his political career, during the 60s and 70s, he held moderate stances, including support of abortion, support of unions, and support of the civil rights movements. So, what happened to him over the years? Well, obviously, he followed his donors. As his donors changed, became more conservative, he became more conservative. So, it seems pretty clear that there was considerable overlap between he and Schumer. There are certain differences we went over in terms of donations and the scale of the donations. There are certain things that are not easy to explain, such as the very strong donations he gets from the retired industry. I wonder what the details of that are about and why he's able to raise so much money from that industry. But you can see in general that his positioning and his stances have been about trying to get rid of any regulation by the federal government of campaign finance. And he's been about
Mhm.
trying to build a Supreme Court that would allow the corporations to run wild in terms of building their influence on legislation. So he's been, we would have to say, extremely responsive to his donors right across the board. Uh, and he is a case of someone who's changed the kind of legislation he supports in response to his donors over a period of time. So is Chuck Schumer. In McConnell's case, he started out as a moderate Republican, given to compromise and to collaborative activities with Democrats in favor of many things that are anathema to him at present. Chuck Schumer's case, he started off as a lefty liberal, and of course, when he needed help from Wall Street, he went to them. He got that help, and then he became a complete supporter of the fire sector and the interests of the fire sector. Sometimes he indulges himself in supporting things that are good for people, and you can see something of the old Schumer there, but by and large, what you see is someone who's dedicated his career to protecting the interests of the fire sector donors. So we pointed to the overlap between the two in terms of donors. We've also pointed out some differences, like the differences in support from the retired sector. Both um, senators have taken considerable money from the health sector. We see how important it is for both of them. Of course, in Mitch McConnell's case, he's completely against any healthcare reform, has opposed it during the 2000s consistently. Okay, in Schumer's case, he supported the Affordable Care Act, of course, because it was felt, okay, the Democrats had to do something about healthcare reform, even though the act has been a giveaway to the pharmaceutical companies and completely inadequate. He continues to support it in line with its healthcare donors. So, given the positions of both men and their support for healthcare donors and for Wall Street donors, uh, and in Mitch's case, for the gun lobby, which is not true for Schumer, but there's critical overlap, which has accounted for the fact that Green New Deal legislation cannot pass the Senate. Getting rid of the filibuster cannot pass, okay, the Senate. Uh, Going past verbal support for protection of voting cannot pass the Senate. No Medicare for all bills are able to pass the Senate. No regulation of Wall Street that's useful can pass the Senate. And you can see that it's because of the donor patterns we've seen, okay, from both men. They support their donors internationally. They support Israel. They are aggressive towards Russia, towards China. They're not for peace. They support the wars, okay, on all the continents. That's consistent with what their donors want. So that's what we've tried to show. I think we've successfully shown it. Have you any comments, Dee?
And it just clarifies right there in the open why nothing gets done and why Democrats, or you could say progressives, feel we can't get anything done.
I think it does clarify. One thing I would add is that so you see these leaders and you see why their opposition to bills that the public generally greatly supports stops those bills from passing, okay, on both sides. But we also have to consider what if by some miracle both of these guys died? What would happen? New leaders would come to the fore, and those leaders would be centrist Democrats that were also donor recipients, and they would support much the same policies and tactics that Schumer supported, okay, and McConnell supported as well. There might be nuances, okay, of difference. Probably the heir apparent, okay, of Mitch McConnell on the Republican side would not be as successful in managing Supreme Court affairs, okay, as Mitch was. He may not be as successful in his use of the filibuster to block things, but Mitch's path would be laid out for his new successor. Schumer's path would also be laid out for his new successor. The new leader, okay, of the Democrats would get heavy support from Wall Street, and he or she would become undoubtedly the senator from Wall Street. So that's what I think would happen. I don't think anything would change. The only thing that will really change things, and by the way, Jeff Denton, if you're still here, and I hope you are, the only thing that will change things is to get rid of all these congressmen and all the senators who are running because they are taking the big money. And then keep on voting against people who are taking the big money until no one in Congress is taking the big money, and everybody accepts that taking big money, taking anything but small donations, will be toxic to their campaigns, and they will lose because voters will vote against them. Until that happens, we won't get the good bills passed that we need to pass. We won't bring manufacturing back to this country. We won't get the infrastructure we need. We won't get the elimination of student debt. We won't get child tax credits. We won't get the voting rights that we need at the national level. We will not get, a Medicare for All bill. As you know, Jeffrey Denton, like you, and anybody else who happens to be watching this, I am a Red Beret supporter of the Red Beret movement for Medicare for All. I'm very active in this, by the way. On Friday, I'll be doing a show interviewing the principals of the Healing Us Network again on the subject of healing us in the Rocky Mountains, because there have been screenings in the Rocky Mountains this week. We'll be talking about the screenings of the Healing Us film at 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 12 p.m. In Mountain Time. We'll be talking about how the screening in Denver went, which is the screening was yesterday, and on Friday we'll be talking before the screening coming up in Salt Lake City, and of course we'll be talking about the progress of the movement at that time. But I have to say that even though I'm a strong supporter of that particular movement, I have to say that I think the best way to get a Medicare for All bill through, both at the state level, single payer at the state level, Medicare for All at the national level, the best way to get those bills through is to dump the corruption first.
Exactly, because we can see that nothing gets done, even though the majority of Democrats and Republicans both want Medicare for all. The majority of Americans want Medicare for all.
And the majority of independents.
Yes, they do.
As well. There's the majority of all three sectors normally cited, and the heavy majority of the independents and the Democrats is for Medicare for All. Why can't we get it through? Because of the donors, because of the leadership inside the Senate, because of the oligarchy in the Senate, the oligarchy in the House. The only way to get rid of those oligarchies is to get rid of the donor system, to dump the corruption. And that works at the state level too. You've got key leadership people in New York State blocking the single payer bill there. You've got key leadership people in California, even though the Democrats totally control the legislature in California. You can't pass a single payer bill there because the leaders are opposed to it. They will not pass it. You can't pass it in Washington because Annette Cleveland is sitting on top of it and will not pass it. But if you vote to dump the corruption, none of these people would be there because it doesn't only happen at the federal level, it happens at the state level. You'd be displacing most of the state legislators too because they're taking big money. Certainly the leaders who are sitting on top of the single payer bills and won't let them through are taking big money at the state level. So whether you want to pass single payer at the state level or Medicare for all at the federal level, what really needs to be done first is to dump the corruption. And let's face it, we're getting no support for this campaign. Very few people watch our shows. People are not organizing to dump the corruption. Instead, they're concentrating their energies on supporting all kinds of other good things that can't be passed because that power structure created by the donors is there. The power structure has to go first. Everybody has to come to realize that. Nothing will pass until the power structure is ejected from the Congress of the United States and until the President of the United States knows and the governors of each state also know that if they don't let these bills through, they will lose in the next election, for sure, at the federal level, because Joe Biden or his successor will be taking all kinds of big money. And the Republicans, of course, are awash in just as much money and maybe even more. Folks, we got to get rid of the money first. A lot of us recognize that. In the abstract, we recognize that. People will assent to the idea of dump the corruption. They'll say it's a good idea. They will retweet our streams. But they won't come to watch. They won't start to organize the movement for dump the corruption. They keep on beating their heads against the wall, trying to pass specific issue-oriented bills that the power structure in Congress is opposed to. And they can't get rid of the power structure because of the donation structure, because of the money. They haven't caught on. They haven't caught on. You got to get rid of the money first. That's got to be job one. And you can't pass any legislation to do it because the Congress is jammed up with the donors' money. So legislation is not an out. No matter how much you pressure, no matter how much you go into the streets, no matter how much you unionize, none of it is going to be successful until you destroy the power structure in Congress. I've come to the conclusion, even though I certainly support the unionization movements, I support the mutual aid movements, I support the movements for Medicare for All and the Green New Deal, even though I support all those things, I know that they cannot pass without doing dump the corruption first. The big question is, can you come to that kind of realization? You out there, can you come to accept that you won't be successful with these other movements unless you get dump the corruption done first.
Mhm.
How many years have you all been wasting your time to get these things passed? I've been supporting Medicare for all now forever. For my whole experience in politics and elections, since my first vote for president in 1960, when yes, I voted for John F. Kennedy, I was for Medicare for all before anybody knew that particular term. And when people learned the Medicare for all slogan in the period starting from 2000 and thereafter, I've been for it then. I was very active in the fight for Medicare for all in 2009 and 2010. You should see the number of blogs I wrote about that and the bitter things I said at that time and the attacks on the decision makers I made. But I was beating my head against the stone wall in 2009 and 2010. And I've been beating my head against that stone wall since. And the Red Berets have been beating their heads against the stone wall since they became active. We have to break down the stone wall. That's the money. Get the toxic money out of politics. The only way to do that is to kick out of politics the people who've been taking that money. You have to make the money toxic to be successful. You have to get rid of them all until they give up taking the money.
Mhm.
That's the only way out, folks. It's the only way out of this loss of democracy that we have been experiencing. To empower democracy, we must dump the corruption in the manner that I've indicated. I guess I'm going to end here. I think there's no better way to end than by sharing once more the rule. Where the hell is the rule? Maybe I don't have the rule up today, even. I gotta. Uh, I don't know where I lost it. Let me see.
Here's Judith says something. Judith says, but we need decent candidates to vote for. How do we find people to run for office who, once they arrive in Washington, can be successful without joining the system?
Okay, Judith. I'm glad you asked that question. It's an important question. Okay, I have to say, a lot of effort is put into finding decent candidates. But I think the first job is to vote against the candidates who believe they're decent, but who are taking the big money that stops them from acting in a decent way. So the first thing to do is to vote against them. Now you ask the question, who should we vote for? And I tell you this, there will be many people who step forward. If in stepping forward they continue to take the big money, you vote against them. You vote in people who are only taking small donations. You choose among them, according to your own preferences, who you think are decent candidates. In other words, first you disqualify in your voting pattern the candidates who are taking the big money, whether they're in office or are first running for office. Then there's left all the other candidates who are only taking small donations. Then you judge for yourself who are the most decent of these candidates from your point of view. This is not magic. It is not rocket science. People will run for office who are taking only small donations, and you will find that those taking only small donations are pretty decent folks. And you won't have any trouble deciding in the end who to vote for when you open your mind and you open your heart to the small donation candidates. Look for them. Learn what they're like. They will be pretty decent Americans, typical Americans. They will be Americans who realize that if they get into office, their job will be to legislate for the people. Why won't they join the system? Because we will have demonstrated that if they take the big money, which means joining the system, if they join the system by taking the big money, we will defeat them. If we throw out every congressperson and every candidate taking the big money, the lesson will be clear and quite public to the new people running on small donations alone. They will realize that we, the people, based on our voluntary decision making, have decided not to vote in anybody who's taking any big money. And so they will not take the big money, but they will look to us for support. And we will only give them that support if they're in favor of the things we want. Think about it. Would any candidate dare to oppose the elimination of student debt when 45 million American voters have student debt? I mean, normally it would be political suicide to oppose that. But you've got the donors out there who can spread propaganda campaigns. But they won't be out there anymore. By the way, candidates who are getting a lot of independent expenditures for them, independent campaign expenditures coming from the big money, they will be disqualified too. In other words, even if the candidates are not getting big money for their campaigns, directly, if they're getting big independent expenditures, they'll be disqualified for that. That's part of the rule. So the point is, the new candidates who run are going to be relatively poor because they're taking only small donations. And they'll be telling you about their platforms and what they're for and why you should vote for them. And the reasons they will give for why you should vote for them is that they're in favor of X and Y and Z, which you are in favor of. Donors won't be in the picture if we all have decided to eliminate them by eliminating the candidates who take their money. So that's how we can stop the new electees from joining the system. The very act of throwing out all the incumbents and all the challengers taking big money will make the lesson clear to the new candidates that the first commandment of politics in the United States is don't take the big money or you lose. That's got to become the first commandment of American politics. And it's got to be the commandment of the people. That's what's got to happen. Dee, any more comments?
I think you did a good job.
Yeah, I was emotionally moved tonight because I'm just getting tired of banging my head against the stone wall. I hope other people are too.
I think we.
Okay, I think there's one thing that's really dangerous. People think that getting into the streets, in other words, this is like Sub Rosa. There's nobody advocating, directly for the kind of revolution we've seen in certain other countries, okay, over the years. They know if they start to do that, their free speech is going to be taken away, that the boundaries of free speech are there. So they're not going to advocate for that. But they're advocating for mass movements. They're advocating for people getting into the streets. And the theory of change is that if enough people get into the streets, that our legislators will be frightened and they will no longer do what the donors want them to do. They will do what the people want them to do. I don't think that theory of change is going to work, or I think it's going to be too hard to implement, and it's going to take too long to implement it. People won't go into the streets for a considerable period of time yet, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter how you advocate for it. They are not going into the streets in the requisite numbers anytime soon to scare these bought people.
It's getting too hot now.
It is much easier for all of us to agree that we will vote against those taking the big money, wherever that leads.
Mm-hmm.
Just vote against them. Get them out. Show that nobody can take the big money and survive. That's relatively easy to do. It's easier than going into the streets. It's easier than waiting years to build up a mass movement for people to go into the streets and scare the legislators and scare the donors and scare everybody. I mean, that's the hard way of doing things. But for us all to voluntarily agree to vote against the people taking the big money, that's the easy way. We can organize that on social media. We can make that go viral. We can make it happen in 2024. But we have to start that movement right now. I guess I'm done for the night.
Yes, I think you did a good job, as I said. And please remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share.
And please buy us a coffee. We both have buy me a coffees. And please
But
go to.
most of all, we're just happy here. We're happy you're here, and we're happy with people that contribute to the conversation.
We are. We're very, very happy. We're very, very happy with everybody. We're very easy to please in that respect. But what we need is this movement to start up and to start off. And for people to begin continue to support Medicare for all, continue to support all these other things that you're supporting. But walk and chew gum at the same time. Support dumping the corruption. And make it the primary thing you support, because that's the only thing that's going to allow the other causes to be fulfilled. I guess on that note, I'm going to say good night. I will see you tomorrow with the neoliberalism show. And on Friday, as I said before, I'm going to see you with the 2 p.m. Healing Us in the Rocky Mountains show, where some of the principles of the Healing Us network will be with us. Okay, at that time, I may not do a Friday night the Dump the Corruption show. I will have to see about that because I am doing the 2 p.m. show and I don't know how long that's going to last. So please come to the Friday show, come to the neoliberalism show tomorrow night. And Dee has an Around the World with Dee and Friends show tomorrow, which I'm sure all of these Around the World with Dee and Friends shows are extremely interesting. I am usually on there. Also, Madeline Hoffman, okay, is on there. And Greg Mallard is sometimes on for those shows as well. And Dee is on for them all. So please go to those shows, okay, at normally 8 o'clock. My shows, okay, at 9 o'clock. When I'm not on at 9 o'clock, then Dee will usually have her show, okay, at 9 o'clock. So thank you for coming. Thank you for
And good night. And good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Good night.
This was an unusually long show.
Yes, it was, but it was just a lot of information, a lot of energy.
Okay, great. It was hard for me to maintain that energy because of those, all the stuff to go through. Boy.
A lot.
Okay, good night, Dee.
Good night.